Good evening and welcome once again to another program of Issues in the News, where we discuss the important events that would have taken place in Guyana over the past week or so. And as usual, we have a packed agenda for this evening. I want to begin, as I normally would do, by welcoming our viewers who are joining us on television across Region 5. Welcome to another program of Issues in the News. And again, in Region 6, those of you who are joining us on television along the east bank of the Berbice River, New Amsterdam, Kanji, and all the way along the Quarantine Coast down to Molson Creek, welcome to another program of Issues in the News. And the tens of thousands of you who are joining us on Facebook Live, and we are now on YouTube as well. Welcome to another program of Issues in the News. You are joining us across the Caribbean, whether you're joining us from North America, from Europe, Asia, and even further afield on Facebook Live and on YouTube. Welcome once again to another program of Issues in the News. And I see Mohammed Yassin from Canada, Sabrina Swetnam, Rabindra Prasad, Neetu Maharaj, Hore Sarkar, Inshan Warsali, Neville Swami, and all of you who are joining me on Facebook Live. Welcome to another program of Issues in the News. And please remember to press that share button. Press that share button on your phone, or share this program on your computer, on your tablets, on your iPad, so that many of your friends and followers can join us in this evening's discussion. Press that share button so that the program can be viewed by as many persons as possible. Bring in your friends, bring in your relatives, bring in your followers in our tonight's discussion so that we can have the widest possible audience. And also, please let me have your comments, let me have your input, let me have your questions so that I can answer them if time permits. I want this program to be as interactive as possible. I don't want it to be a monologue. I want it to be a dialogue, an exchange of ideas, an exchange of views between your good self and I on this program. So let me have your views, let me have your questions, let me have your inputs so that we can have a dialogue and not a monologue. I want to begin tonight by recognizing that preparations are ongoing for local government elections in Guyana, which are fixed to take place on June 12th, 2023. The PPP and its party machinery and our candidates and our activists are across the length and breadth of our country doing political work and preparing for the 2023 June 12th local government elections. We are the only party in Guyana that is contesting every single seat in every single local authority organ across the length and breadth of our country. And that is why we say without the fear of contradiction that we are the only national party in this country. The APNU is contesting some 65% of the seats only. We are contesting 100% of the seats across the local authority areas of our country. And again, I repeat, that is why we are the only national party representing all the people of our country. The APNU has finally made it clear that they do not want local government elections. I have been saying from the inception over a year and a half ago that they do not want to contest these elections, that they have seen the writings on the wall, that they would be resoundingly beaten at these elections, and they have consistently and persistently over the past year or more have been throwing in the path of these elections all manner of hurdles and objections, hoping that they can succeed in delaying the elections. They have failed abysmally in their efforts to thwart these elections from taking place. They have tried persistently at the level of GCOM through their commissioners to raise all manner of objections against the list, against the employees of GCOM, against boundaries demarcated for these elections, and all those efforts yielded no fruit. Now they have issued a formal statement in which they are calling for an investigation into acts of electoral fraud by the PPP, and they are asking for the local government elections not to proceed. Their sidekick, the Alliance for Change, has long since signaled their intention not to contest the elections. They recognize very early and very quickly, and rightfully so, that, to use Ramjatan's word, they would be dead meat if they were to contest these elections. The AFC exists in form only, and I believe its only membership consists of those persons who are sitting in the National Assembly. Outside of those persons, I don't think that there is an AFC. The PNC is faltering badly. There is great internal strife. Roysdale Ford and Amanza Walton Desir are aggressively battling for the leadership of the party from Aubrey Norton. That is a public secret. And they have lost thousands of their supporters, many of whom have crossed the floor and are now with the PPP, and some of them are candidates for the PPP at these elections. They also obviously have no finances to run an elections. So the next best thing, rather than accept that they are in a moribund state, they now fabricate and manufacture allegations of electoral fraud against the People's Progressive Party. This is a party that you know and the world knows has a history of institutionalizing electoral fraud in this country. They rigged the 1968 elections, they rigged the 1973 elections, they rigged the 1980 elections, they rigged the 1985 elections. Many people believe they have rigged the 2015 elections, and fresh in your memory are their numerous and consistent and persistent efforts to rig the 2020 elections. Their attempts to rig the elections and the role that GCOM officers played in that conspiratorial manifestation was just recently confirmed by a commission of inquiry presided over by internationally respected jurists who have come to the clear and settled conclusion that various and varying methods were employed in an attempt to pervert the results of those elections. You witnessed it yourself. You did not need a commission of inquiry to confirm that. But it's important that we record these horrendous occurrences in permanent form so that future generations can read them and be educated and be informed of who have a proclivity and a history of electoral frauds and rigging of elections. And these are the very people with a straight face are accusing the PPP of electoral frauds. The elections have not yet been held, but yet they are accusing the PPP of electoral frauds. And they are refusing to use the legal methods that are in place to prosecute their complaints of these alleged frauds. The Local Election Authorities Act provides specific mechanisms for the complaints they are making to be made to the lawful tribunal and authority. And it provides a process for how those complaints are to be prosecuted and investigated. But they're not employing those legal methods. They prefer to speak to the press, and they prefer to engage in propagandistic postures rather than try, if these allegations, as they are saying, are so rampant, why not employ the available legal mechanism? They're not doing that. But to themselves and by themselves and to their dwindling support base, they are uttering this mantra that the PPP is attempting to rig elections. You know, the international community knows, and the world knows of the track record of the PPP, and that the PPP has been the victims of fraud for decades in this country, electoral frauds. And up to 2020, if we didn't fight and we didn't struggle and we didn't go to the courts and we didn't have the international support and the local support, we could have possibly again been the victim of another rigged elections. Fortunately, we withstood the efforts and fought the efforts that were being made to rig those elections. And today, we are in government. So, let us see how this will unfold. But I am looking keenly at the international community for their response. Because I recall that when we were in government and there were delays in the holding of local government elections, the international community spoke out and were very critical of the non-holding of elections. And here it is. The government is doing everything possible to support GCOM, the electoral machinery, to hold these elections, and you have the main opposition parties manufacturing and concocting allegations of fraud and threatening a delay of these elections, in addition to throwing hurdles and obstacles in the electoral machinery's path in the hope that they will prevent these elections from taking place. I would like to hear the view of the international community on this matter. But we are proceeding in our preparatory path for these elections, and we have no doubt that on June the 12th, elections will take place in Guyana. There is another fringed element who continues to speak to election day, June the 12th, being a day of resistance and trying to create discord and racial and ethnic strife in our country. We have to also pay a keen eye to those fringe elements and monitor their activities, because they want mayhem. They want disorder in this country. They don't want peace, stability, and progress. They can't win elections by any democratic process. They want power through violence. They want power through disorder. They want power through ethnic strife. And we have to always be vigilant to the activities that they would be pursuing in as they prosecute or persecute those objectives of theirs. So we have to be conscious of what is going on and continue to work to build, nurture, and nourish our democracy, which is still a fledgling one. And we have to be constantly aware that there are elements within the political architecture of this country who are bent in delivering body blows to the democratic polity and machinery of our country. And we must always be ready, willing, and able to protect that democratic credential of ours against these constant attempts at assaulting it. So I thought I will put that out there, and that brings me straight into the next issue that I want to speak about, which is the incompetence of our parliamentary opposition. We have an aggressive agenda, both at the level of our developmental trajectory, as well, and that is in executive government and at the level of central government, as well as we have an extremely aggressive agenda in the parliament. So, because the development agenda of our country requires the requisite legislative support to cradle, to support, and to propel these economic ventures and other infrastructural and social sector ventures upon which we are embarking. Many of these ventures cannot be accomplished unless we have a robust legal and regulatory framework to govern the implementation and operationalization of these projects. So naturally, to accompany our aggressive central government agenda is an aggressive legislative agenda. But our legislative agenda is constantly being slowed down and stymied because of an incompetent and inefficient opposition. Now, we have put out there a data protection bill. Since April the 15th, 2023, inviting submissions within 21 days from that date. To date, we have not received a single submission. Now, when we spoke rather, or executed a contract for the e-card that we will be implementing, we were the subject of a barrage of criticisms emanating first from public commentators, civil society organizations, and the Guyana Human Rights Association. I said to them, one of the main plank of the criticism was that we don't have the type of laws in the country to protect the data that would be accumulated and stored on the card, and we don't have the law that will allow for the protection and use of that card and the data contained therein. And I said to them then that those were well-founded criticisms, but they were premature, that we will bring the law. But we have to start the contract. We have to execute the contract, and the contract itself provides a time frame when the card will become operationalized. And in that time frame, we have to put the legal and the administrative apparatus in place that will operationalize the card. But their criticisms were premature, because I don't know that if they didn't know that we were working on data protection legislation. So, almost contemporaneous with the execution of that contract, we completed the data protection bill and we made it public, inviting submissions within 21 days. That 21 days deadline will expire on May the 6th. That's Saturday coming. And to date, I am reporting that we have not received a single submission. The bill is online. An email address is there to which submissions are to be sent. And I check it regularly. And as of this afternoon, we did not receive any submissions. The opposition in the parliament, who are paid by taxpayers' monies, have not yet read the bill. Not yet read the bill. What they do, and it's their general approach, they don't read anything. They piggyback upon criticisms made by civil society and they adopt it as their own. No original thought, no intellectual effort on their part. Anything that requires the exercise of intellect, they do not engage in. So, nearly 3 weeks have passed and none of them have read the data protection bill, though it is publicly available. And come next week in the parliament, when we plan to lay the bill, you will hear them asking for more time, that they didn't get time to study the bill. You will hear that they want the bill to go to a select committee because they haven't read the bill. I am saying that that constitutes a gross dereliction of duty and an abuse and misuse of public funds, because they are paid a salary. They are granted all types of facilities to do the work of the people. I don't want them to agree with the bill, but they have a role, unfortunately, to play. No input from the opposition, nor from the civil society commentators. And the time frame which has been stipulated for receipt of recommendations and inputs is quickly coming to an end. And I am betting you my bottom dollar that when the bill reaches the parliament, you will hear a Manza Desir accusing us of being authoritarian and not wanting to discuss and consult. And you will hear the chorus on their part shouting for the bill to go to a select committee when nothing is stopping them from reading the bill now and submitting their inputs on the bill. I just want to alert the listening and reading public to these developments. Again, as I said, we have a very aggressive agenda, and we have several bills that we are consulting on at the same time because we have to operate on multiple tracks. We have international deadlines to meet. So in relation to our anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism framework, we are going to be under review by the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force come September 2023. Viewers would recall that the opposition, using their one-seat majority, caused us untold problems in the past under President Rabotar's government when they refused, for no reason, to support legislation that were needed for Guyana to meet its international obligations. As a result, we were put on a grey list and then on a blacklist, and we were sanctioned, and our financial structure and system was put under severe stress, and sanctions were imposed. They nearly caused a collapse of this economy. We are now in a good place, and we have to pass these bills to meet the deadline of our mutual assessment for September. So 2 bills are out there for public consultation. So that's 3 bills in all now. Then today I met with the real estate operators in Guyana, and I handed to them a real estate agents bill of 2023. This is another area that has been identified as a gap where there is no regulatory framework in our AML CFT structure. Billions of dollars pass through this sector annually, and the sector operates without any statutory or regulatory framework. That vacuum has been identified as a deficiency, and we are to fill that gap, and this bill is intended to do that. The bill is very comprehensive in nature. It has some 83 provisions and several schedules. This bill was crafted as a result of consultations held with the real estate operators in Guyana. We consulted legislation of this type across the Caribbean, and we looked peculiarly at the Guyana circumstance and environment and came up with a bill that we believe adequately and robustly provide the type of regulatory framework suitable for Guyana and that which will comply with prevailing international standards and obligations. The bill defines real estate, and it has a system to register operators within the sector. It lists the qualifications and disqualifications for registration, and it creates a register of all operators in the sector and tells you how applications are to be made and how changes in information can be effected on the register. It establishes an association. It establishes a board to run this association, and it has rules governing how the association will function. It has provisions dealing with issues of indemnity insurance. And then it establishes a licensing committee that will license operators. It has how the committee will be constituted and the tenure of its members and how members are to be appointed and removed, and the affairs of this body is going to be documented and laid in the National Assembly. It speaks to brokers' license and how those can be obtained. It also speaks to professional misconduct and the duties and obligations of real estate agents. And it speaks to disciplinary matters and how disciplinary proceedings can be instituted and will be conducted against errant operators in the sector. And like every other law, it provides for offenses and penalties. And it has also a code of ethics that will bind operators in the sector. So it's a comprehensive bill, and we have we have given a copy to the real estate associations of Guyana, and we have requested of them to examine it and to give us their inputs and their recommendations in writing, and hopefully we can engage them one final time before we complete work on the bill and take it to the National Assembly. But certainly this bill has to be debated and enacted before the end of this period of the National Assembly, because we are going into recess in August of 2023. And the bill has to be part of the laws of Guyana before our mutual assessment commences in September. So it is important that we pass this bill. I am just giving you a glimpse of the hectic schedule, work schedule that we have. And rather than offer constructive criticism and support in the national interest, you have an opposition. All it does, it obstructs, it opposes, it stymies, and it dilates. And why? Because they have no constructive contribution to make. And that is demonstrably clear by what they say in the press and the way that they conduct themselves in the National Assembly and outside of the National Assembly. So, tomorrow, we will be celebrating World Press Freedom Day. This is a day 30 years ago set aside by the United Nations in recognition of the importance of a free press in a democratic society, the importance of free expression of thought, views, writings, which include critical expressions, and it recognizes the important work of journalists in this field. And as Attorney General, I'm happy to say that press freedom is alive, is vibrant, and is institutionally assured and guaranteed in Guyana by our most supreme law, but not only in paper, but in practice. And when we celebrate these occasions, it is incumbent upon us not only to reflect upon our current realities, but must reflect upon what existed before and the road that one had to journey to arrive at our current realities. Unless we do that, I don't believe that we will truly appreciate that which is extant and alive. And press freedom, as I said, is extant and alive now. And unless we reflect upon what existed before and the struggles that were embarked upon to achieve this current status, we may not appreciate what we now take for granted. And it is also important that we reflect upon that journey so that our younger generation can be educated about their history. And the history of Guyana in relation to press freedom was a checkered one. Naturally, if a government imposes itself on a society, by rigging elections and not winning government by a popular vote, then that government naturally can't tolerate freedom of the press. It can't tolerate the criticisms that will naturally flow from its commission of fraud at elections year after year. So from 1968, as I said, to 1985, we had massively rigged elections. And naturally, out of that will spring an authoritarian government and will create an authoritarian environment which is the antithesis of freedom of every type, including freedom of expression and freedom of the press. So the state in Guyana for 30 years monopolized the press and controlled the press. and certainly did not encourage criticism, but penalized criticisms. Criticisms were not tolerated. There was an intolerance. And these things go hand in hand with a dictatorship, with an authoritarian government. So, with the state controlling 90% of the commanding heights of the economy, that was the terminology then used, naturally the state controlled freedom of the press or the press. And those who decided to write critical of the government of the day were brutalized. Father Dark, a Jesuit priest who was a photographer for the Catholic Standard, a newspaper published by the Catholic Church, was stabbed to death in broad daylight in front of the Ministry of Home Affairs. Many journalists of that era were locked up and tortured. Renowned Guyanese journalist Ricky Singh was forced to flee this land. Mirror, the official organ of the People's Progressive Party, challenged a law that was passed by the Fobbs-Burnham administration, which required the Minister of Trade to grant permission to import newsprint into Guyana. And the challenge was that once you give a discretionary power to grant, you're giving a discretionary power to refuse. And newsprint is so integral to freedom of expression that if you give a government officer or a minister a power to grant, which includes a power to refuse, then that minister can lawfully refuse newsprint being imported. And newsprint was not available locally. And if the minister refused to grant newsprint, permission to import newsprint, then we can't print the newspapers. Then you are depriving me of my freedom to express myself. And that was the case filed. The case went to the Court of Appeal of Guyana. Naturally, a dictatorship doesn't want an exterior court. So they abolished all appeals that was available then to the Privy Council. They removed the Privy Council from the court structure. So the Guyana Court of Appeal became the highest court. They took the flag of the PNC and they put it on top of that court to show you who controlled that court. And that court ruled that importation of newsprint is not connected to freedom of expression. Can you believe that? That importation of that newsprint, you can't print the paper without newsprint. And our Court of Appeal ruled that newsprint has no relationship with freedom of expression. And they dismissed the case. At the same time, a case of almost identical facts was filed in Trinidad by a man named Chocolingo. It went all the way to the Privy Council, and the Privy Council ruled that newsprint was integral to freedom of expression. The Guyana Court of Appeal, the same year, ruled that newsprint is not integral to freedom of expression. And right there, you saw the reason why countries in the Caribbean were advancing and Guyana was stagnating. Because they had the Privy Council and we had a Court of Appeal upon whose roof the governing party flew its party flag, not the national flag. That simple example explains and illustrates the importance of an independent judiciary to an evolving society and to economic and social progress. Just fast forward to 2020 and think what would have happened in Guyana if we did not have the CCJ. Just think about that. Think about that, confidence motion and all the other cases. If the appeal died at the Court of Appeal and we had no higher court. And we must reflect upon these things. So that was the state of freedom of expression in Guyana. Moses Nagamutu, who became Prime Minister of an APNU AFC government, can tell you how many times he was brutalized as a journalist under the PNC government. But he's ashamed to say those things because he joined the dictators. Fast forward again, when they had a one-seat majority in the parliament, and they used that one-seat majority to cut the budgets of the government, including the budgets to Guyana Information Agency, NCN, the radio stations, and the Chronicle newspapers. The state, all the state media, they slashed their budget to $1. We must not forget these things. That constituted an assault on freedom of the press because the state has a duty to disseminate information to the citizenry. And APNU AFC, enjoying a one-seat majority, slashed the budgetary agencies of the state responsible for disseminating information to the public. All the state media budgets were cut to $1. That is what they did. Again, Ricky Singh features prominently. Ricky Singh was then, during the 2015 to 2017, 2020 period, was writing for the Chronicle newspaper. He wrote an article in which he spoke critically about the diminution of portfolio responsibility for Moses Nagamutu as Prime Minister, saying that he was the most diminished Prime Minister in the Caribbean because he had the least powers of Prime Ministers in the region. And for that, Ricky Singh was again exiled. And up to today, well, he's no longer, I don't know what is the state of his health, but he was banished from writing in the Chronicle newspaper. And that's just a couple of years ago. Just a couple of years ago. I recite all those factors and those historical occurrences for you to compare that period with what obtains now. And you see the great disparity and the freedom which now permeates the atmosphere, the environment in Guyana, including freedom of the press. In 2013, our government passed the Freedom of Information Act in this country to allow the citizens and political opposition to have a legal and institutional right and access to information within the government and the state apparatus. But we have an inefficient and incompetent opposition. They wouldn't write. But they would walk around wholly quarreling that they don't get this document. Who would they ever ask for these documents? Every day or every week, I try to at least make one public disclosure, either in writing or in a television engagement, divulging information about our government, more particularly my sector. And every minister does that. Almost every week, President Mohabir engages the press, either through the social media or through the formal media. And that's the difference which exists today. But I can't close this issue of freedom of the press without speaking to the corresponding duties and obligations which devolve upon the press. It is common knowledge that no freedom is absolute. Any freedom that is absolute is antisocial. Freedom of expression is guaranteed by our Constitution, has a list of conditionalities to which it is subject. And we must bear those conditionalities in mind. We must not only remember the freedom and the right, but we must remember the duties and obligations which go concomitantly with those rights and freedoms. And our press must be alive to these limitations and obligations. They are as equally important as the right itself. So there are certain times where you have to restrict freedom, and the Constitution says it. This is the document that gives you the right, and this is the document that tells you how the right is limited. It is limited in certain instances when it is reasonably required to do so in the interest of defense, public order and public safety and public health. There is also a limitation when it comes to protecting the rights, reputation, and freedoms of other people. So you have a freedom of expression and a right to publish, but you can't publish something that is defamatory of me and attacks my reputation. It also restricts use of telephone and telegraphy in the public interest. And that's why you have legislation that allows for interception of telephone conversation if crime is if it threatens national security. And this is not in relation to Guyana alone. This obtains right across the world. When you're a public officer, you are required to maintain confidentiality in certain information that you receive as part of your functions. So when, as a public officer, you can't speak to certain matters, it's not a deprivation of your freedom of expression. The Constitution limits that and puts an obligation upon you. You can leave the job and you operate as a free agent. But once you are working with the state and information comes into your domain due to your function, and it is in the interest of the state to protect that information, you cannot divulge it. And the Constitution also limits political party, persons and institutions from disseminating racial information which may result in ethnic divisions among the people of Guyana. And that must be emphasized. It says that imposes restrictions upon any person, institution, body, authority, or political party from taking any action or advancing, disseminating, or supporting any idea which may result in racial or ethnic division among the people of Guyana. And most importantly, Most importantly, the article says this: freedom of expression in this article does not relate to hate speeches or other expressions in whatever form capable of exciting hostility or ill will against any person or class of persons. So, anytime you are speaking or writing or expressing yourself in a manner to cause or excite hatred or racial hostilities among or between the citizens of Guyana, you have no right to do so. Freedom of expression in this article, guaranteed by the Constitution, doesn't extend to that. It doesn't cover that. So when people are being charged for exciting racial hostilities, I hear the uninformed shouting freedom of expression. That's not freedom of expression. Read the law. You have no freedom to preach racism. You have no freedom to excite ethnic strife and to preach hatred and violence. You have no such freedom. The Constitution tells you that. In the same way that you have no freedom of expression to cry fire in a crowded building, you have no freedom to excite racial hostilities in Guyana. And that's the law. And I have a beautiful quotation from Chief Justice Wooding of Trinidad and Tobago speaking about freedom generally. He said this in a case of Collymore against the Attorney General in 1967, 50 years ago, but it rings true to today. He says this, I quote, "The freedom to associate confers neither right nor license for a course of conduct or for the commission of acts which in the view of Parliament are inimical to peace, order, and good government of the country. In like manner, their constitutionally guaranteed existence notwithstanding, freedom of movement is no license for trespass, freedom of conscience no license for sedition, freedom of expression no license for obscenity, freedom of assembly no license for riot, and freedom of the press no license for libel," unquote. So when we speak about freedoms generally, we must also, with the same breath, speak to the concomitant and corresponding responsibilities and duties that are so intricately tied to the exercise of those freedoms. So tomorrow, as we celebrate Press Freedom Day, a great day indeed, and the press is a great medium in allowing people to communicate and in the nurturing of a free, democratic, and thinking society, we must simultaneously recognize the obligations and the duties which go hand in hand with this great freedom. I have gone over the program time, so I want to thank you very much for spending the last hour with me. I believe that we have covered some important issues in our discussions. And until next week, I want to say goodbye. But before I do so, on May the 5th, that's Friday coming, we will be celebrating Arrival Day. And I want to take this opportunity to salute all of our people who arrived in this country. And I believe on May the 5th is the day that the East Indians first arrived. I want to, in particular, salute the East Indians of our country and wish all of our people a happy and enjoyable arrival day on May the 5th. Thank you very much, and please enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you.